Our program this evening is a little different from our usual programs. This is not a lecture, it's not a presentation. It is meant to be a conversation. For about 45 minutes, Imam Antepli and I will engage in a conversation, and then we will open it to the audience to offer questions and engage in conversation with him. I will say this again later, but the idea is to offer questions, brief questions. There's no jet ski tonight, unfortunately. That's an Oscars joke.
I don't think it worked anyway.
Yeah. But please, if you have a question, ask your question. Please do not make speeches. If you do or you go on too long, I will frankly interrupt you and call you on it. So questions, yes. Speechifying, some other time. I cannot tell you how personally delighted I am to be able to welcome Imam Abdullah Antepli to the PJCC and back again in our Peninsula community. Imam Antepli was the first Muslim chaplain at Duke University, and he now serves at Duke as the chief representative of Muslim affairs and an adjunct professor of Islamic studies.
Any Duke connection? Any Blue Devils? No?
Want to know about the basketball?
That's the biggest religion in town.
Yeah. Right. He is also the co-founder and co-leader of the Shalom Hartman Institute's Muslim Leadership Initiative. And I believe it is true to say that Imam Antepli, in great measure, was the inspiration for the project that we call the Muslim-Jewish Connection on the Peninsula. Because 2 years ago, he participated in a Muslim-Jewish panel discussion at Temple Beth Am, and inspired us to the possibility of these two communities coming together for discussion, dialogue, learning, and celebration, among other things. So, Abdullah, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, good. Tonight happens to be Abdullah's birthday. He is a distance from his family, so wouldn't it be nice if we sang happy birthday to him? So please join together. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Abdullah. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to enjoy my 44th year, 3 hours longer, so I came here.
Yeah, we thought about singing it in all different kinds of languages, but who knows how many we have here.
At least Turkish and Arabic.
Turkish and Arabic would be great. Maybe, yeah, for sure. So, Abdullah, you were born in Turkey. You said that your parents were secular in a Turkey that was becoming more and more secular, and that you found God as a child. I think you said, God came and filled the gap in my heart. So, what happened when you were a child? How did this happen? And what did you realize was missing from your life?
Good evening, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. It's wonderful to be back to Peninsula JCC. And every time I visit these incredible Jewish institutions, which is reflective of the open-heartedness of the Jewish community, it fills me with joy and envy at the same time. The Muslim community, they look at these Jewish institutions and organizations, and sometimes more royal than the king. Many Muslims are telling me, if only Jews appreciate and count their blessings, if only the Jews would appreciate these amazing institutions, which Muslim community is just beginning to build. We are about 40, 50 years behind the game, because most of us are, except African American Muslim community, recent immigrant community. So may these institutions continue to thrive, may them continue to be a source of inspiration to the newcomers. And may you play a role as the Jewish community who's a little bit more seasoned and ahead in the game, to extend them a hand and lift them up so that they are not going to repeat your mistakes and they will learn from your successes, inshallah, Be'ezrat Hashem. So, to understand the dilemmas of my early childhood, one has to understand Turkey and Turkish history a little bit. Because it's bizarre for a country which is nominally 99% Muslim, that it has a tradition of French-style secularism. And many Americans, they don't understand a form of secularism that hates religion. Many Americans, even those who are secular, they are secular, religion is not their cup of tea, but they don't hate religion, or they don't oppose religion, they are not hostile. I think one of many gifts that American society can offer to the world is Anglo-Saxon, American improved secularism, which is friendly. Separation of church and state is sacred, but that's mainly to protect religion, not to govern it. But the founding fathers of Turkey learned secularism from their French teachers. As I'm sure at least any French, before I offend anybody here. French school of thought in secularism is, when you are a secular, which you should be as all enlightened people, you should also oppose religion. You should be hostile towards religion, and you should oppose any public manifestation of religion and religiosity or religious symbols. Check with your cousins in France. It's not a very religion-friendly environment. And the founding fathers of Turkey not only learned from their French teachers, but they implemented this a-religious, anti-religious, religious unfriendly secularism violently for about 6 decades. That any religion was confined into the 4 walls of the mosque. Anything above or beyond is completely unwelcome, especially in the earlier stages. For decades, many of my Muslim sisters are wearing hijab. Wearing a hijab was verboten. It was illegal. So if you wear the hijab, you couldn't enter a university as a visitor, let alone being a student there. My wife couldn't complete her education because she was wearing hijab. She was kicked out of a university. And I will never forget her tears, sobbing literally, when we arrived to JFK for the first time, me coming as a graduate student. The immigration officer was a Muslim American with a hijab. So my parents were from that small but very powerful minority who really despised religion, who really thought religion was only for unenlightened people, uneducated people, and they were victims of their own bias against religion. My father wanted to make a point of his hate towards Islam or religion. He named a majority of his children after pre-Islamic Turkish gods. Like, can you imagine your father naming you Balaam or Haman? to make a point.
Yeah, very nice.
Something like that. But Baruch Hashem, as we say, I am extremely grateful because in 1980s, there were many people in very modern, enlightened way, they were popularizing religion. There were many groups and organizations in a very modern, in a very attractive, compelling and engaging way. They were trying to make religion in a very relevant reality to the teenagers that I was growing up. And part of, I think we're going to talk about it also, I was on the path to nationalistic and very anti-Semitic popular teenage movements. And some of these religious movements also saw that if they don't try to engage the teenagers or the youth in Turkey in that way, there are some alternative, very destructive movements in Turkey. What attracted me to religion is really the structure. That's why in many traditional Jewish spaces I completely find myself at home. That you slow 5 times a day, you remember God. 5 times a day you invite God into your life. You try to feel the presence of God in your life. You orient yourself internally, which is Islam and Judaism has a lot to offer in that sense to the world, which is very, very similar. And believing in this living God, and believing in the God that can only be experienced horizontally. In Islam, I think to a certain extent, Judaism, very similar language, it's not only right belief, it's not only orthodoxy in the vertical sense. You have to take that love of God, you have to take that belief in God and manifest itself in the horizontal way with your interaction with the other human being. So when I became Muslim or religious, I denounced my name, which was Tuncay. It means full red moon in Turkish, which shaman Turks used to worship. So in my own conversion zeal, I found it theologically unacceptable. And I took the name Ovadia, Abdullah. It means the slave or servant of God, because that's what attracted me to religion in the first place. That love of God is just not a slogan. It's not a necklace. It's not a statement. That's one of the most repeated messages of Quran. If you claim to love God, you have to serve God's creation. If you claim to have a relationship with God, you have to take that vertical relationship and manifest itself in the horizontal level.
Yeah, I spent my childhood in a religious home, growing up in a religious home with a father who was a rabbi. Looking for God was all I ever really wanted to do. So it wasn't too hard for me to fall into being a rabbi. So you found this God that meant something powerful to you, and you may have seen God everywhere, but you also encountered anti-Semitism. How did your belief and love of God merge or engage with the anti-Semitic beliefs? Were they cultural? Were they
I
from
cannot
school?
emphasize enough. The anti-Semitic culture that I grew up was very nationalistic and very secular. The Turkish nationalism, Turkish nationalist home that I grew up, the first book I read about Judaism and Jews was the children's version of the Protocols of Elders of Zion. Yahudilik ve Masonluk, for those who are Turkish would know. The second book was International Jew by Henry Ford. Do you remember that guy? In 1930s and 40s. And how disgustingly familiar in some of the current issues to those populist rise of anti-Semitism of 1930s and 40s. How we thought we buried those demons a long time ago, but now it's showing its ugly face again. So anti-Semitism was in my secular years. Before the age of 15, and I read Mein Kampf as my third book, so I was convinced for a number of years that Jews as people, Judaism as religion is irredeemably evil. It's not bad, but it's irredeemably evil. This little evilish minority was behind anything and everything. AIPAC was the Protocols of Elders of Zion meeting every year. That's what the conspiracy. And it's not entirely pointless. You know, every Muslim wake up in the Muslim majority world. Every Muslim says, what's wrong with us? After so many years of golden civilization, why did we fail? Why Muslim civilizations are today going through perpetual failure and perpetual misery? Every Muslim asks this question. I will just give you a quick anecdote. I took a group of American Jewish leaders about 10 years ago to Turkey. How many of you have been to Istanbul? Good. For those who haven't been, you guys are sinners. And next Yom Kippur hit harder. And make sure you will at least see Istanbul. And we are in front of this blue mosque, incredible monument built by our ancestors. One of the American Jewish leaders asked an 8-year-old boy who was selling napkins. He said, did your ancestors build this? And he just proudly stood taller and said, yes, and we are taking a break, we will build bigger ones. Like every Muslim, as if like a children of a bankrupt wealthy man, swims in the oceans of guilt or dissatisfaction, desperation. And that angst and anger and disappointment, of course, multiplied by millions if you are living in a war zone. Here is a country, Afghanistan, where telescope is invented. Chemistry, algebra was invented in the land of Afghanistan. Today, 72% of the country has yet to be introduced electricity. Women literacy rate is only 2%. It's just unbelievable deterioration. So you are part of a civilization which has lost, which after so many years of golden age slipped into dark age, and then you are looking for answers. Why? Why my team is losing all the time? And this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory embedded ideology comes and gives you a black and white answer. Extremists are very attractive ideologies of any kind because they simplify things. They simplify and give black and white answers to very complicated questions. Everything becomes essentially good and evil, and your side is good, the other side is evil. The failure or the collapse of Muslim civilization is not as a result of so many complicated social, political, religious, intellectual, cultural things, but it's about this Jewish thing. It's just Jewish minority who are cancerously in the brain tissues of the world, controlling media, banking industry, etc. So it was drilled into my heart that I spent a number of my years in pro-Palestinian protests, burning Israeli flags. That was the extent of our pro-Palestinianism. Doesn't help to any Palestinian, but it helps the Chinese economy because all the flags were made in China. We would buy like a whole box of it. It was those cheap China material of 1980s. That quality improved, but still the same situation. But let me finish that sad story, which has a very happy ending. Deep-seated hate early on, what saved me is my religion. I became extremely religious, and then I wanted to be more religious. I went to religious schools to study Quran and Islam. And the more I learned about Islam, the more I learned about Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, I couldn't reconcile that hate that I have swallowed in me. And especially after meeting with some Jews, God-fearing, God-loving, merciful, compassionate human beings, amazing souls, I took the nearest exit, and since then I've been driving in the opposite direction.
That's so very interesting, because I think we have a stereotype, both in the Jewish community, but in America in general, I think, we have the stereotype that the more religious a Muslim is, the more likely he or she is to hate Jews and to engage in violence. Your religious education turned it around for you.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's not unique to me. I am part of FBI Academy for de-radicalization program, and if you look into our law enforcement, people who are looking for, who are studying extremism, counter-violent extremism, one of the antidote to religious radicalism and extremism is to teach mainstream theology. One of the antidotes to any kind of radicalism is to expose these people. A lot of radicals, a lot of people who happen to be trapped in the evil organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, terrorist organization, when they are jailed, for the first time they had a chance to study Islam. They had a chance to, among many of these terrorists who externally look very Muslim, but their religious literacy is very, very low. They found a group of British youth who were going to Turkey to join ISIS. And in their suitcases, they found books, Quran for Dummies, Islam 101. Like, at some point they said, if we're gonna die in the name of Islam, maybe we should know something about this. That's absolutely true. Islam saved my life. Islam, and the religious institution and organization that I was studying Islam in, its purpose wasn't to make everybody Jew lover.
It was a madrasa.
Yes, but in a very modern way. But its intention was not to make me love Judaism. It's just they taught mainstream Muslim ideology and theology, and they taught about the life of the Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad married to 2 Jewish women. One of them converted to Islam, one of them remained Jewish, and she died Jewish. Prophet of Islam, messenger of this religion, had Jewish in-laws. He attended Shabbat dinners, he ate with them, he sat with them. Look, you can't reconcile, because one of the regretful outcome of this recent deterioration of Jewish-Muslim relations, if you are in conflict with that community, you go back and rewrite your history with them. Jewish-Muslim relations is almost like a 2 divorcing couple. As a clergy, like all of us, unfortunately, more than we like, We engage in bitter end of a relationship. We facilitate divorce. And it's so painful to meet these two individuals who've been together for 35 years, raised 4 children, and built a life, but the marriage is ending bitterly. And all they can remember, all they can talk, all they can highlight in what happened in the 35 years is all the horrible things that they've done to each other. All the horrible things. That's exactly what's going on in the Muslim community and in the Jewish community as well. We, more often than ever, increasingly remember the bad episodes of our history and try to suppress the good episodes. And we look at our similarities, values, morals, which brings us together and unites us. We don't even want to remember, but we look at those one piece of scripture here, one piece of scripture there. Its literal meaning is very unfriendly towards one another, unfortunately.
Well, way back in the olden days, around 2013, or actually a little before that, you went to Jerusalem. Wasn't your first trip there, obviously. You took a trip of Muslims and Jews when you were at Wesleyan as a chaplain. But you went to Jerusalem and met with the leadership of the Shalom Hartman Institute, which is a Zionist institution, strongly attached to the State of Israel. And you suggested to them, Yossi Klein Halevi, who became a very dear friend, and Daniel Hartman, you suggested to them that they should create an education program for Muslim leaders. And did they laugh?
More than that. They ridiculed me.
Not nice,
Yes.
not nice.
In a loving, caring way.
Yeah, you persevered, and this Muslim Leadership Institute was created. When one reads about it, it's really dramatically inspirational. You brought Muslim religious and lay leaders to Jerusalem, to a Zionist institution, not for the purpose of interfaith dialogue, I think,
Yes.
but for the purpose of giving them an education in Jewish history and Zionist history, in Jewish narratives and Zionist narratives. That's basically earth-shattering, it seems to me. What did you hope to accomplish through that? And what did happen because of that program?
Because of my personal history improving Jewish-Muslim relations and reconciling Judaism and Islam became a very central personal calling for me. I wanted to take my own recovery from my own anti-Semitism and scale it up because I don't want to reinsert existing stereotypes. Not every Muslim is anti-Semitic, but I think the propaganda and hate that I have been exposed to, it's very, very common in different levels. And given the incredible reconciliation of the Jewish-Christian history after Holocaust in the 20th century, which gives me a lot of hope, which gives me a lot of determination and motivation. If you think Jewish-Muslim relations is so depressing, if you think obstacles that we are facing, and I'm not naive, I spent many, many months in West Bank. I work in Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, in Jordan. I have spent all those years. None of what I learned diminished my Palestinian, my loyalty and my connection and my love to help the Palestinian community, my brothers and sisters in that community. I know the challenges that we are facing. But compared to these challenges to what Christians and Jews for the last 2,000 years were facing, it's incredible. The fact that relatively we came a long way. We came a long way where we were as far as Christians and Jews are concerned. This is, as I often say, always repeat in every talk that I give, what Christianity and Judaism, Christians and Jews were able to do is one of the biggest gifts given to God by humanity. I love that verse in the Exodus when God says to Moses, tell children of Israel to bring me some gifts. Like, what kind of gift make Hashem, Allah, smile? God is the owner of everything. Like, what kind of gift you can give? But I think that Jewish-Christian reconciliation is an incredible gift. That will make Hashem, that will make Allah smile. And I believe ethically and morally that a similar moral obligation, a similar gift expectation of the divine is now on us as the 21st century Jews and Muslims. We have to, in the 21st century, reconcile Judaism and Islam and Jewish-Muslim relations. And it is on to us to pay attention to that voice from Sinai and respond in the similar way, with a lot of moral courage, commitment. And in my own recovery process, I identified many of the mental blocks, emotional blocks of my community. What is causing anti-Semitism? What is causing fear and the distrust of the Jews to the Muslim community? What I realized, one of the biggest obstacles was, as a result of this decades-long Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as a result of this decades-long polarization, we have become so strange to one another that we don't even speak the same language anymore. There are two types of Jewish-Muslim conversations in America, and both of them are useless. And I don't know which one is makes me more angry, depending on my day, what kind of a bad hair day I got. One type of conversation, it happens more often than I like. Jews and Muslims come together and say, we are not going to talk about Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Intentionally, we are not going to talk politics. I don't know what else to talk about. Like, that's dividing us. That's pumping anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on all fronts. What else to talk about? You may not pick as a first topic, but if you are not serious, if you are not really sincere, you have to make it from the beginning your promise that Jewish-Muslim relations will go and mature and become healthy and strong enough that you will talk about Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I feel very strongly about this. I am sorry if I offend anybody who's involved with these kumbaya singing interfaith sessions, but any Jewish-Muslim relationship attempt which will not survive the next Gaza war, it's a waste of time. You better do something else. You better go and help the homeless. This is one type of conversation. Second, we come and only talk politics as partisans, as foot soldiers of a proxy war. I've been to many of those shouting matches. We have all talking points written by somebody else. We have all self-serving facts. Everybody has their favorite United Nations resolution, and we throw each other. And nobody goes convinced. Nobody leaves the room in any way or shape. I was desperately looking for an organization or an institution who will teach me how Jews see these issues, how Judaism as religion, Jews as people, Zionism as a form of nationalism, and Israel as a secular nation state is understood by the modern day Jews. Because our communication difference is so huge. In many ways, I always feel Jews on one side looking for a New York map, and Muslims on the other side looking for San Francisco map, thinking that they actually are looking for the same map. They are shouting at each other. No, turn right to find the main street. No, turn left. Because we don't even mean the same things. I'll give you an example. I will never... for many Muslims, unfortunately, because we follow Israeli-Palestinian conflict through the lenses of Palestinian suffering, because the way in which we perceived and experienced the creation of the state of Israel, which is for many of my Jewish brothers and sisters, it's a homecoming story. It is a fulfillment of a 2,000 years of dream. But the way my community has experienced is another wave of crusades, another Judeo-Christian assault to the Muslim world, another land-grabbing, colonial land-grabbing attempt in the Middle East, in the heart of Islam and Muslims. So most Muslims in different levels, some more strong than others, when they hear the word Zionism or Zionist, I'm not equating Zionism to jihad, but its emotional impact on a Muslim is as if you hear the word jihad, which for many Muslims it's a very innocent word, not anymore after 9/11, but it makes a similar impact. We don't, even if we speak the same English language, we don't mean the same thing. And we don't know how things appear on your screen. I will, again, never forget, we don't even hear sometimes. In one of the biggest Muslim holidays, Eid al-Fitr, at the end of Ramadan, when Muslims fast the whole month, you guys are fasting only once a year and complain the rest? Come and try my way, where we fast the whole month. And at the end of the Ramadan, that's a Muslim Christmas. Muslim Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Seder combined. All Muslims turn into lit Christmas trees and try to make up all the food stuff. It's a joyous day. On that particular day, a Jewish community invited me to give a talk. Usually I should say no, but I missed no opportunity. I don't turn down any invitation. Eid al-Fitr celebration was in the morning. In the afternoon, I went to speak with this community. I said, I am coming from Eid al-Fitr celebrations, and I'm bringing the Muslim community's greetings to you. I said a few times Eid al-Fitr, partially because of my thick Turkish accent. And one of the gentlemen from the front seat stood up and said, "What? You celebrated Adolf Hitler?" It's very telling. It's very telling the way we hear one another. I am making this a little bit longer than I should, but I feel so strongly that a little bit of education goes a long way. I was looking for an organization who is not in the business of partisan bickering, who is not in the business of trying to make me Muslim Zionist, who is not trying to sell anything to me, but who is confident and secure in his or her Zionism and invite me to their internal conversations. A little bit of education, where my Muslim community will get a chance to see how they understand these world. As part of this program, MLI, which is a 13-month fellowship, and as part of 13 months, each participant spent a month studying at Shalom Hartman in Jerusalem, these issues, Hartman Torah, Judaism, Zionism, and Israel, as Jews see it. There are so many Dayenu moments, but one of my favorite is, one of the participants, as halfway through the program, said, "Abdullah, I hate you." I hate you. I said, why? Because before MLI, before this program, I was in a very comfortable spot. I was telling to myself, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm not a hater, I'm an anti-Zionist, I'm an anti-Israeli. I am opposing a political reality. I don't hate people, in her own mind. But she said, after I see what Zionism means, how much of a big spectrum, different experience that is, and how for many, many, many Jews, Israel is not a just secular nation state, but its existence has some connection to their Jewish identity. How many Jews, in a very different way, endow certain level of sanctity into the existence of that state, I realized that the comfortable spot that I was is not comfortable anymore.
I think that story explains a phrase that you've used in other contexts, which was this program you created for the sake of Islam.
Absolutely.
So the possibility, we all know that one of the ways people get to know each other is by sharing stories. To be able for two faith communities to share their most important narratives.
Absolutely.
And it's important that it's plural, because there isn't a single narrative, probably. That's the way people begin to understand each other, and then they can hear the Arabic that you're saying,
sure,
without translating it into Adolf Hitler. Since Hartman presents a lot of different narratives about the Jewish people and its history, the chances are, very likely, Islam also has different narratives. Are some of these narratives more authentic than other narratives in Islam?
Can you answer that question for Jews?
I will. Yeah, and
to me, I think the geniuses of Judaism and Islam, if you think two Jews, three opinions is a Jewish thing, you have no idea. You have absolutely no idea. I believe in the big tent of Islam.
Mm.
And there are, of course, certain boundaries. But every interpretation, if somebody says, I'm Muslim, I make it extremely difficult for me to say, no, you're not. If somebody says, this is my religion, I'm part of this religion, of course there are rules, of course there are expectations. It wouldn't be my Islam, but I have absolutely no reason to say, you are not part of this community, you are not part of Islam. And it's the beauty of Shalom Hartman. It's incredible. I don't want to do institutional propaganda, but check it out. It's one of the very few places under the same roof, the very broad ultra-Orthodox to ultra-liberal Judaism and the Jewish experience and political engagement, center, ultra-left and the far right, politically speaking, in their Zionism. It's, for those who are Muslim in the audience, a Muslim version of Shalom Hartman would look like, under the same roof, Sunni and Shia, wine-drinking, pork-eating Muslim and observant Pakka Muslim, they are all under the same roof, intensely debating, arguing, but at the same time respectfully trying to present a representative voices of Judaism to us. And it is my commitment. Not only I will defeat, inshallah, Muslim anti-Semitism, but I want to build a Muslim version of Shalom Hartman, not for Jewish-Muslim relations, but for the soul of Islam, for the soul of American Muslim community or the broader global Muslim community. We need these kind of institutions.
Well, both these communities have what I think the technical term is crazies in the community who preach zealotry.
You mean Islam doesn't own all the crazies?
No, I will give you a
feels
whole
that
long
way.
list. We share that very, very much in common. How do communities, how without denying that their narrative is part of the Jewish or the Muslim narrative, how do we address the crazies in the community?
We both have crazies, but Baruch Hashem, thankfully, your crazies are yet to be the kind of monstrous reality that has become in my community. Your crazies are still non-violent for the most part, but every Purim reminds that Baruch Goldstein moment.
Right.
That train is always there.
Right.
That train is, or that threat is, no one is immune.
Just for those who may not know, Baruch Goldstein was an Israeli Jew, I believe a doctor.
Israeli-American Jew who grew up in Queens.
Who grew up in Queens, where I come from. How great is that? On Purim Day, Purim is one of those Jewish holidays that celebrates, they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. So on Purim Day, Baruch Goldstein marched into the cave of Machpelah in Hebron and gunned down 29 Israeli Jews praying.
Muslims.
29 Muslims praying.
While they are worshipping, while their faces were on the floor, glorifying God's name, while they were saying Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam in Arabic, he just showered them with bullets.
Right. Terrible, incredible tragedy, awful, beyond belief. So, sorry.
Yes. Islam, in many ways, like Sephardic Judaism, we have never had a pope. Thankfully, I'm grateful. We have never had an institution like church or denominational. It's a very decentral religion, and it's a miracle of history and God, how still an Indonesian Muslim and a Chinese Muslim and a German Muslim still pray the same way. Without absence of that infrastructure, without institutional, it's an incredibly decentral religion. In the past, when Muslim societies are intellectually, socially, spiritually, politically, economically healthy, these crazy movements always pops up. But institutions are so strong, the immune system of the society is so strong, figuratively speaking, it was always able to catch them when they are small and destroy them. There are moments, I wish I could say Hezbollah is not Muslim. I wish I could say, as much as they turn my stomach upside down, as much as Osama bin Laden, ISIS disgusts me, it's a perverted, evil version, but I cannot say they are not Muslim. I cannot. We cannot disown our crazies. We can only defeat them by improving the overall health of our society. That what their existence, pretty much like why Jewish crazies are not becoming a much larger, much more destructive, much eviler reality, because the Jewish community, Baruch Hashem, alhamdulillah, it's more or less healthy, and they have built those internal checks and balances. It doesn't go that ugly. Unfortunately, Muslim community, I can explain more why, but that social, political, economic, cultural, historical the disciplines and barriers is not there anymore. And therefore, we cannot defeat this cancer, because what we are trying to defeat, crazies don't represent individuals or buildings. We cannot defeat them only by military means. These are ideologies. You cannot put a bullet through an ideology. You can. You have to defeat bad religion, bad Islam, with a good ideology, with the overall, improving the overall health of a society. But I will just give you an example. I was in Jenin in 1999 and 2000. Jenin single-handedly produced more suicide bombers than any other places in Palestine.
Wow.
Why? Because the desperation, the destructive hands of occupation, ethical moral failures of occupation in that part of the West Bank was constantly producing. And something magical happened. I don't want to over-exaggerate, but in 2004, 2005, at the end of the Second Intifada, few IDF generals who were in charge got in touch with few imams, few community leaders, and the life has just slightly improved. And I was there this summer in the Jenin refugee camp. It's incredible. It's really incredible how much that evil ideology, which had a very easy time in recruiting and creating and producing suicide bombers, once the context is slightly healthier, it makes an incredible change.
There's a principle I know from Christianity, which is the devil quotes scriptures. One of the things that we get to encounter with people is that in our scriptures, yours and mine, there are very difficult passages, even painful passages, that are often used in propaganda and in argument. When you teach Quran to Muslims, when you talk to them about Quran, how do you teach them about these, what do you say, how do you teach them about these passages that very right-wing Jews will use to say that the Quran is anti-Semitic or preaches violence against Jews?
It's really true that misery likes company. You know, Muslims are gradually and regretfully and shamefully and so painfully, quite honestly, we are internalizing this anti-Muslim hate. More often than ever, Islam is evil, Muslims are terrorists. It's been repeated so many times that Muslims, understandably and inevitably, feels like as if we own all the crazies in the world, as if we own all the bad things in our tradition. And whenever they see Joshua's entrance to the Holy Land, whenever they read those Torah portions, Leviticus, which is seemingly God is advocating for violence, you should see this mischievous happiness in those Muslims saying, "Oh, we don't own all the crazies in the world. We don't own all the crazies in the world." This is a very good example how studying mainstream Islam and theology de-radicalizes people. Mainstream theology. In the madrasa, in order to become an imam, you go and study in-depth religion. But you never study Quran from cover to cover. The English translation of Quran is the most Protestant thing you could ever imagine. We never study Quran in that way. For any Quran study, Quran interpretation, or Tanakh study book, you go, there's a page, in the middle of the page, 2-3 verses about a particular theme. And then around that page, the hadith, the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad about that thing, and a lot of interpretation, a lot of negotiation, a lot of back and forth. Does it sound familiar?
Yes.
Pretty much. And in many parts of the Muslim world, during Maimonides, Halavi, in Spain, in other parts, Muslims were doing this exercise, negotiation of divine revelation, the Word of God, in conversation with human experience. This was very Jewish, very Muslim for the longest time. So no Muslim take one verse of the Quran and builds anything on it. You can only do this if you know nothing about your religion. So once you put this in the context, significant part of the job is done. Once you put these, because in my anti-Semitic years, I knew 6 verses in the Quran, and all these 6 verses were saying Jews are cursed people, God turned them into monkeys and pigs, they are going to be cursed for. But once I studied in the Quran what those verses were revealed for, what was they referring to, what did Prophet Muhammad say about it, how it was understood for the last 1400 years, there's a whole story. It's not universal commandment to hate Jews or kill them or see them as cursed people whatsoever. So I don't do anything creative or genius. I just teach tradition.
So it's context and it's a kind of historical perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it always does the work, because Quran, for the most part, explaining to itself. I will never forget, a Chabad rabbi said, your scripture is anti-Semitic. I said, which verse are you referring to that pigs and monkeys? I said, thank God we have iPhones these days. I put up the translation. I said, read the verse before and read the verse after. So God is specifically talking about a specific community who was violating Shabbat and rebelling God by violating, not observing. Their punishment was because of their Shabbat observance skill. I will never forget his mischievous and slightly troubling joke. He said, well, I can identify with this. And it's a very figurative speech, symbolic speech. God is talking about their soul. And Torah and Quran is full of those stories where God destroyed certain cities, but there is no universal message out of that thing, that you are obliged to hate Jews from beginning to end. That's absolutely not the case.
Okay. We're going to open this up for questions in just a minute, but before we do so, this is the question that will undoubtedly be asked if I don't ask it first. There is a whole community of moderate Muslims who share your narrative and your understanding. It appears to many in the Jewish community that they're silent. They don't speak up against terrorism, against the fringe of Islam. How do you experience
Where
that?
are the moderate Muslims? It's a $1 million question. There are only two answers to that question. There is a bloodshed, barbarism, savagery, beheading, rape, killing taking place in the name of Islam in many parts of the Muslim world. And 99% of their victims are Muslims. 99% of Islamic radical terrorism, Muslim terrorism kills, only 99% of their victims are Muslims. So where are the moderate Muslims? Why don't I hear Muslim voices condemning? There are two possible answers to this question. One, that voice doesn't exist. 1.6 billion, 7 billion people, they see this ugly reality primarily destroying their own communities, primarily destroying their own members, and somehow they are silent. They don't care. They're apathetic. I invite you to analyze the lack of common sense in this answer. I invite you, how is it that it's possible? How is it that Muslim community is somehow not bothered to even voice, let alone work against it? This ugly cancer, this evil reality emerged in the Muslim community in the last 40, 50 years. The second answer is that voice exists, but it's not as loud as it should be because many of the Muslim majority world or Muslim communities are struggling with a lot of lack of resources. But even the existing weak voices doesn't get into your sources of information. Somehow that voice exists, some voice exists, but you sometimes, whatever sources you are relying on in following the world, in news, that if I hit you, we will be in New York Times tomorrow. But whatever I say or do today, you are not going to make it even LA Times or San Francisco Times.
Right.
That means, I think that basic common sense should be, that's what hurt me the most when I was so anti-Semitic. How did I numb my common sense? How did I believe that 14 million people were running the show? I felt so stupid. I felt so deceived and lied to. That's what hate does. Why didn't I go one extra mile and look some other experiences, some other books, some other resources? Why didn't I just check some other information? To me, the correct and moral and ethical answer is absolutely Muslim outrage, moderate Muslim condemnation is absolutely there, but somehow your source of information is not covering it. It is partially, of course, it's on the Muslim community to do a better job, but it's partially also it is your duty and responsibility to go one extra mile to see what is the Muslim organizations, what is the nearest mosque, what is the nearest Muslim community that I can build a relationship with and pay attention to. Let me go to their website. How can you ask this question just because you don't hear it and you can pass judgments where you make no effort to look at least to the web pages, at least the web pages of the major Muslim organizations in the world and in the United States? I think it's a very important question, but that's what hate and propaganda does. it destroys your common sense. It destroys your common sense. And no one knows this better than the Jewish community. To make millions of people for centuries believe that Jews drinking Christian children blood and in a matzah soup, who would make these stories? But if you say it enough number of times, and if you have no interaction, if you repeat every Sunday in church, people buy it. People buy it. Your community has been subject to this lack of common sense propaganda for a very long time. I think your history, your painful history, should give you additional resources and lenses and moral calling to say, if a community is collectively dehumanized, I am not going to buy this argument. I cannot believe 1.6 billion people are at its best silent, at its worst complicit and supporting this barbarism. Doesn't look at Hamas and Hezbollah and disgusted by it. Like, your common sense should kick in and say, there must be those Muslims. If they are not appearing on my screen, on my Facebook algorithm, that means something is wrong with my algorithm. I have to go one extra mile and look for it. Unfortunately today, forget about this moderate Muslim voice. If I tomorrow say I denounce Islam, I'm an ex-Muslim imam, and if I say Muslims eat their own children, I believe a good portion of Americans will believe it. A good portion of Americans will say, if I say something so outrageous, Muslims are making nuclear bombs out of detergent in their bathroom, or something like this. Otherwise, a regular common sense people says, give me a break. But when it comes to Islam and Muslims, people will actually believe it. That's the last thing I will say. Let's get questions. After 8 years of eating bacon every morning, going to church most Sundays, 29% of Americans believe that Obama is Muslim. I don't know how many times this guy needs to be baptized. And if you take that 29% to certain states, certain political parties, certain churches, 60%, 70% people believe that he's Muslim, and that's a horrible thing. That's some sort of bad thing. It's unbelievable what repetition of wrong information, inaccurate, misleading information does to people's common sense. Otherwise, very intellectual, sound, enlightened, educated people, they turn into like fools. In the psychology, we call it open season. People, once they are numb by their propaganda, they are sophisticated in anything and everything. But when it comes to that particular issue, they turn into sixth graders at its best. They become very unsophisticated.
So it's your turn. I would like to invite your questions, but I mean that specifically. Questions. There are a lot of hands. We'll come around.
Let's have a gender equality. One male, one female.
One female.
And ladies first.
Ladies first, okay. I can't see. So, so please, questions, no speeches, no jet ski, but I really will interrupt you if your question isn't to the point. In the corner, over on my right, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I've been to a lot of these meetings and I'm active in the interfaith community, and yet when we call for Muslims and Jews to get together, invariably it's Turkish Muslims. And more often than
These
not,
Turkish delights.
more often than not, it's women. And I wonder if you can explain this.
Is question clear? We are doing Jewish-Muslim work, but we are trying to engage with the broader Muslim community. We are casting our net. All we catch is a bunch of Turkish fish. And it's always women. What's wrong with men and what's wrong with non-Turkish Muslims? That's a very legitimate question. So Turkish community, especially, as you know, I'm a fellow Turkish delight as well. And this particular Turkish community that shows up in these meetings they have 30, 40 years of interfaith work. They are low-hanging fruit. So if these other Muslims are not showing up, that means you are done with low-hanging fruit. You have to build taller ladders and climb up to the little bit high-hanging fruits and try to get the kind of, and that requires a little bit of study. That's the power of MLI. Really incredible. We do two things. One, education, which really brings our understanding and our ability to talk to the Jewish community, especially those who are loyal to Israel, those who are somewhat call themselves as Zionists. And the second, by going to Israel, it really builds the kind of goodwill act. It brings so many unseen walls down. Unseen walls down. I suspect many of those Muslims who would like to engage with you, but they don't believe you would take their criticism of the state of Israel nicely. They don't know how to remain pro-Palestinian, loyal to the solidarity of the Palestinian brothers and sisters. They don't know how to voice their human rights violations and their suffering and not end that relationship and not everything fall apart. So I highly encourage you not to give up. Build those taller ladders. Start with these Turkish delights, but not end there. Meaning, can you study a little bit more about Islam, Muslims? Can you create in these JCCs and incredible institutions some opportunities where you can try to at least make sense? You don't have to agree anything. How Muslims see this conflict? How Muslims see this state? How Muslims understood this? And how can you engage with goodwill acts in any form and shape that you can do to make them, if it is important for you? Because Islam and Judaism says one thing, and it's so universally true. If there is a will, there is a halachic way. If there is a will, there is a halachic way. I will never forget. Ovad Yosef, do you know him? Israeli, Iraqi descent, famous scholar, who was the founder, one of the founders of Shah's party in Israel. He is this very ultra-Orthodox rabbi. And of course, if you ask him, can a woman sing and a man listen to her voice singing, he would say no. But he was listening to Kulthum, famous Egyptian singer, all the time. And when people said, dude, what's going on? And yeah, why are you practicing? And he said, oh, if she's dead, you can listen to her. It's amazing how there is a will, there is a halachic way to do this. Friends, let's not give up. There is so much at stake. There is so much at stake. American Muslims and American Jews, we have a moral obligation to show what a 21st century reconciled, little bit more ethical, normal, harmonious Jewish-Muslim relationship would look like. In any other parts of the world, it's not possible. It's not possible to even get together with Turkish delights. So where it is possible, before this goes to any further deterioration, further polarization, further rise of Muslim anti-Semitism and Jewish anti-Muslim bigotry and Islamophobia, let's model and exemplify these conversations. If this is important, to me it's very important. Because for selfish reasons, quite honestly, that's part of why Shalom Hartman partnership is working, because my Jewish partners are also very concerned about rising anti-Arab, anti-Muslim racism in the Jewish community. Because both of us know, Judaism and Islam tells us, if hate becomes unchallenged about anybody, it first destroys that people. It's a saying of the Prophet Muhammad that hate destroys the bearers first. It erodes your morals. You become blind to all the ugliness, and you start committing things, like kicking out African refugees and whatever. You otherwise moral, ethical human being, hate has to be incredibly challenged early on before it numbs you, blinds you. So since there's so much at stake, since it's possible, since we haven't really tried hard enough in many ways, let's give a much stronger try. And we are working with Rabbi Amy here at JCC, with Rabbi Nat Ezra. We are exploring the initial steps were nice, but it's not producing as impressive result as we thought. And we are even further brainstorming to see how we can do this. So stay tuned.
We're looking for a male.
I don't want to dwell on the Turkish delights, but I was curious as to your view of what's taking place in Turkey today.
Is the question clear? What's going on in Turkey? I will only say, because it's not directly speaking to the Jewish-Muslim relations topic of this conference, even though that's also relevant, because Turkish Jews, which is about 20,000 left, age average is 74, a very old dying community, is because of this ruthless anti-Semitic fascist dictator that we have in Turkey now. Unfortunately, he pushed the anti-Semitism to the bones of much larger segments of the society, regretfully, which used to be very much tolerant, accommodating, given the Sephardic Jewish experience in the Ottoman Empire. Regretfully, this man, in many ways divisive, he is part of this global rise of fascism and dictatorial authoritarianism, regretfully. What's happening in Turkey is a very sad and tragic story. I am Turkish. 1/3 of everybody I know in Turkey is in jail. 1/3 of, and another 1/3 has left the country. Most of them smuggled themselves illegally in primitive boats to Greece, and from there on to many parts of the Western Europe and the United States. They are trying to build a life. Another 1/3 is sitting in Turkey on a pile of anxiety and fear. Regretfully, a model country, a model Muslim majority country, which could have produced the first homegrown indigenous Muslim democracy, which could have proved to the world that Islam can reconcile modernity, Islam can produce its version of secular democracy. What it teaches us is, it's very, very important, any political movement, any political progress, any religious movement or religious progress, if it is built around one charismatic man, it's doomed to fail. And if you don't build system, if you don't establish term limits, if you don't, President Erdogan, whom I loved and respected for a very long time, I don't think he was evil, I don't think he was using democracy as a tool to come into power. I don't believe so. But he became one because of this unchecked democracy, success after success, success after success. At some point he became this paranoid megalomaniac who was determined to remain in power at any expense, even if Turkey goes through the drains. We saw this with Saddam, we saw this with Gaddafi, we saw this with Pinochet, we saw this with many dictators in Latin America. Regretfully, Turkey will be, as you can tell from my broken voice, it's a bleeding wound in my heart, it will get a lot worse before it gets any better. Let's hope it will bounce back.
Yes, go ahead.
So you don't make speech, I'll make 2 sentences. Somebody more than 20 years ago gave me Quran. So I didn't know at that time what the Quran was. So I said, what is this? He said, that's for you. And I took it, and then maybe I read a few pages, and then I gave it to somebody. I didn't know what to do with it. Anyway, and the other thing is, in school you teach, Islam is one hand sword and one hand Quran. I thought it was very barbaric and very, Anyway, when I went to Spain, Alhambra Palace was most poetic. Of course, the older paintings kind of fade away, but I could see very serenity of Islam. So I said, well, I have learned something. And that's more than 20 years ago. It was beautiful experience. And the mosque in the town was so humongous. I never been to Turkey. I never been to. But so it changes all my perception of Islam.
Thank you very much.
That's it. And and I'm Korean in my hometown, so we have beautiful Islam mosque. It's I think we are over 10 years now, and then we have everything, including the Jewish and everything. In Korea has a very funny position now. I don't know what's going on. So my question is, I've been coming to this meeting. I think Rabbi knows that. Try to learn what the Judaism and Jewish culture, which I still get lost. But so much
You are not alone.
conflict going on in the Middle East. Why you kill your own people? Why? Can you make some sense out of it? Why you kill? You just said 99% of victims of your violence is Islamic people. Why?
Okay, let's hear an answer.
Thank you for these various segments of your comments. Alhambra is another beautiful place. If you haven't been, you are a sinner again. You should make this part of your atonement, and you should absolutely see. In the words of that 8-year Turkish boy, we will build better ones, inshallah, in the future. And we will build it together this time. Because Al-Hamra was at a time when Jews and Muslims were producing knowledge, poetry, science. It produced like Maimonides, Halevis of that time. Why this is happening in the name of Islam, why 99% of the Islamic terror and Muslim terrorism victims are Muslim, it's killing its own people. There are two possible answers to this question. Or you have to say, what is producing this barbarism, savagery, bloodshed? What is producing organizations like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah? Why these evil people, sometimes in the name of Islam, exist? Is it the religion of Islam producing these people? Is it the theology of Islam? Is it something in the Quran? Somehow these people are just sitting and reading the first certain verses and somehow becoming radicalism, which I argue it's not as simple as that. I wish it could have been that simple. I wish it could have been few verses of the Quran is causing this problem. We could have deleted those verses and the problem would be solved. Or like any other complex, as I said, part of the civilization, social, economic, political, cultural failure. These societies that produces these cancerous, evil, terrorist organizations and people are deeply broken in every possible way, in every possible sense. And when you push people, you are from Far East. You can generalize or look at the similar examples of other religions. I am deeply disturbed by the slightly inaccurate and misleading reputation of Buddhism in this part of the world. When you think of Buddhism, but what is the first thing pops out into your mind? Dalai Lama, nice grandpa that you always wanted to have but never had. Buddhism or Buddhist meditation is how you get high without smoking hashish. Like there is this concept as if this Buddhism is immune from violence. I lived in Myanmar. I lived in Myanmar for 5 years. I speak Burmese as good as my English. And I have seen those very pious Buddhists in the name of Buddhism. What you are seeing now, they are burning villages after villages. They are raping women in mass scale in the name of Buddhist nationalism, in the name of religious chauvinism, etc. But I refuse to believe that Buddhism is inherently violent or evil, or Buddhism is Buddhist theology. Religion itself never becomes evil on its own. Religion becomes evil when it's merged or married to certain social, political, economic, cultural realities. It has to be part of a combination of much bigger socioeconomic and geopolitical realities. And just to complicate the question a little bit, many people naively in the West look at what's going on in the Middle East with ISIS and etc. And they say this is a sectarian violence. Some of these 99%, they are killing each other because some of them are Sunni, some of them are Shia. It's again, lack of common sense is incredibly disturbing. As if religious or sectarian difference will be enough reason to kill one another.
But it's going on too long, too much.
Well, if you study Christian wars, if you study the ancient wars, violence is what I'm trying to convince you. Violence is innately, inherently human. Religion is only one of many factors that brings that monster, which is innate and inherent in each and every one of us, which is extremely important. Otherwise, we will go after religion and religious communities and we will mislead. We are not going to solve this problem. We are not going to cure this cancer from our communities.
We're looking for a masculine question, and here it is.
I don't know whether to address this to Imam or Rabbi Levi, but my Iranian friends tell me that Iran has the largest Jewish population in the Middle East. And
It used to have, not anymore.
we're told there's still a significant.
No.
But
Regretfully. After 79, almost majority of them left. They are in LA.
And Great Neck, Long Island.
They have the best food. I cannot. God has blessed Ashkenazi Judaism and Jews with so many things. but food is not one of them.
Do you have a question you want to?
The other part of the question is that those that are left, what is their fate? Are they subject to discrimination, or are they living peacefully? And how is it that they're not persecuted if they are not?
I believe only 200 families left. And I can check the numbers, but very minuscule. And they are very pro-regime and anti-Zionist. They are only able to stay because they are publicly, constantly denouncing every Holocaust. They call it Holocaust Deception Day. Ahmadinejad instituted that evil man, Holocaust Deception, the Holocaust Lies Day, or something like this. It's the biggest Holocaust denial event. And if you look at some of the YouTube videos, there are two groups of Jews there. One from Brooklyn, Natura Karta Jews, they go there because they are also anti-Zionist Jews, and a group of Iranian Jews. They are able to live peacefully because they are very much in line with the evil regime's evil ideology.
Fatih?
Alaikum assalam, apa khabar?
Yeah.
Dari Indonesia, selamat jalan.
Yeah. I could totally relate to your story. It's like you were speaking about my childhood, except your parents were not religious. Mine is what you call the craze. But it was very suffocating as a child I didn't know anything about Judaism. I didn't know where Israel was, who Jews were, but yet all I had towards Jewish peoplehood was hatred from seeing all these very graphic images, propaganda magazines, and that's all we know. So I have three questions. My first question, as the leader of MLI, what steps would you take to counteract this? Because
Sure.
I don't want to know any more children being teaching hatred. That's enough. It's too much. And my second question is.
I will repeat the questions, don't worry.
Okay. My second question. I've been doing coordinating the Muslim-Jewish connection for some time.
I heard.
And every time we started to touch the issues about Israel, of course, it's become, we step back like years from where we were. But the more pressing issue, every time you start asking organizations to take a step, it's like most organizations wants to stay in the safer place. It's safer to just not having a saying in this issue. And I think we're wasting time to trying to take organizations to follow in the Muslim-Jewish connection effort. Why can't we focus in community solely? Because when people talk, organizations will move.
Yeah.
So please let me know the steps.
Vimru, amen.
And my third question, I went to some masjid and observing Jum'ah, and I've met some wonderful imams around the Bay Area. But some imam in their sermon, listening to them, it feels like listening to the Fox News version of Muslim.
Yes.
Why is that? And I want to know what are your thoughts about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Three phenomenal questions. I heard wonderful things about you. Make sure you stay, so after the program I want to have a brief conversation with you. The first question is, growing up in Indonesia, I also was exposed to a lot of anti-Semitism, but it was coming from a religious language. It was coming from a religious place. What can we do about this? It's another $1 million question. Regretfully, if you go to, especially the Jewish anti-Semites, and they exist, Natura Karta, if you go to their YouTube videos with Bahasa Malayu or Bahasa Indonesian subtitles, The speaker has maybe 2,000 following. I don't know, what's the Natura Carta's number in total in the world?
I have no idea. It
Feels
feels like a lot.
Natura Carta. These,
A sect of the ultra-Orthodox.
Oh,
who are anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli. They call Zionism as Khulul Hashem.
Yeah, it's desecration of God's name.
They want Israel to be abolished, even if it requires killing 6 million Jews. Like, these people are psychotically genocidal against their own people. But their YouTube videos, Bahasa Malay version has 7 million, 10 million viewers, etc. In parts of the world where people don't even meet a single Jew, they keep consuming anti-Semitic literature. We have to defeat Muslim anti-Semitism. We have to defeat Muslim anti-Semitism in its religious grounds, in its political grounds, in its ideological grounds. It will require a long-term, large-scale educational project that MLI is deeply involved. I've been to Indonesia and Malaysia many times, giving workshops to newspaper and magazine editors, teaching them what is criticizing the state of Israel, what is anti-Semitism. How can you remain in criticizing a secular nation state and not cross the line into hate? This is possible, still possible, because most of the anti-Semitism is somewhat still innocent, and somewhat it is politically and emotionally embedded. It is coming from. But the version who are intentional, deliberate anti-Semitic industry, people who translated those books and given to me, those are much more difficult, because a lot of it's industry, people make money, like Islamophobia industry. People who are making millions of dollars by casting clouds of suspicion and fear. And some of them are Jewish, some of them are involved in Jewish philanthropy, intentionally and deliberately trying to spread hate and false information. That's much more difficult, and that requires governments, much bigger organizations. We have to do this for the soul of Islam, as I said, not for the favor to the Jews. If we can't defeat Muslim anti-Semitism will destroy Islam. We won't be able to recognize this religion. If Muslim community cannot defeat this enemy, we will be obsessed with this, and it will turn into something like a medieval Christianity, God forbid, in some aspects. Education is the only trick I know, my friend. Education. If you look how Christian anti-Semitism was defeated, regretfully after Holocaust, but it wasn't only Holocaust. It was a lot of work. Church went through a deep soul search. Institutions, communities, they moved the mountains. We need that large scale of education. Secondly, a lot of communities, I totally agree with you, that Muslim organizations, for the most part, all these alphabet soups, acronyms, they represent sliver of the Muslim community. At its most, according to Pew and the Gallup, Muslim organizations and mosques have access or influence to about 10 to 15% of the American Muslim community. And if this 10 to 15% always want to play safe, don't want to rock the boat, and don't want to engage with difficult conversation, we should reach out to those 85%. We should look at those people. You're absolutely right. If you can attract enough number of Muslims to this reconciliation work, those alphabet soup acronym organizations, gatekeepers, who are so reluctant because it's difficult, because it requires using some of the internal equity, because it will rock the boat, they will follow the majority if people inshallah come. The third question was?
The sermon.
Yeah, regretfully, the American Muslim community still really like 1930s of Jews. I don't know how many of you know or remember from your parents' generation, when large number of Eastern European Jews immigrated, they brought their Polish rabbis, their Hungarian rabbis who speak barely proper English and always repeating the same shenanigans. Overwhelming majority of the mosques are still relying on their religious leadership to overseas. They bring these people from different parts of the Muslim world. They literally pick them up and plug them in Palo Alto, in San Francisco, in the peninsula. And these people, many of them struggle in English. English is not their first language. They are trained in very socioeconomically and culturally very incredibly different societies. I'm not justifying, but they need to go through so much training to be able to articulate Islam to the American experience. What you hear is incredibly correct, but part of it is inevitable. These people are not equipped to serve as an American imam. We have to train our leaders, we have to train our imams in America through as American as apple pie realities. Most of those problems will disappear that way. More than 50% of the mosques, they don't even have an imam. Can you imagine? Can you imagine a shul without a rabbi? But
They might be better off.
that's a much longer question too.
Yeah.
This lady has been trying to.
Okay,
Can I-
but Steve, a short answer, because we're almost out of time.
This is important.
Okay.
And besides, there's more women here than men.
Yes.
As was noted earlier.
Okay.
And besides, man has been taking
Okay,
this space
so
for a long time.
I'm so happy you're here. I saw you first at the JCC, and I've been involved in a lot of interfaith. I took class in Cincinnati in the Hebrew Training Center there. I took classes here at the PJCC. The classes were not good. Somebody needs to create a curriculum for these people, number one. I lived in Cincinnati. That's Reform Judaism started in Germany, but it didn't take root here. It took root in the United States. Why don't you guys put together, and what did the founding fathers do? They started a training school for more rabbis, so do that. And a newspaper. And there was one more thing, but I forgot. What else?
JCCs.
But the like you said before, the map is there. So create American Islam.
I hear you loud and clear, and that's my mission in life. That's why I came to
Wonderful,
America.
wonderful.
I believe America can help reveal Islam the best of it itself. Because that's what America did to Judaism, to Catholicism, to many other religions as well. The civic culture here, every religion reveals the best of itself if the society that live in is functional, it's healthy. But it will take some time. For Judaism, it took 40, 50 years. Be patient with us. Secondly, it's not an excuse. 9/11 created this monster that we weren't ready for. I am on the board of 11 mosques in North Carolina, in Virginia, in DC. I go through the budget. All those 11 mosques, approximately, they spend 30 to 40% of their revenue on outreach. After 9/11, all we do is trying to tell the world that we are not monsters. We are not here to kill you. We are not here to declare Sharia. But if you are so obsessed with outside world, that comes at the expense of your own well-being. We could use some of that money in investing in seminaries, in imam training schools, in investing in our community, in training our religious leaders. But understandably, Muslim communities, especially in this day and age after election, for many Americans, the election and the election result is a shock. For many Muslim Americans, it's not a shock at all. We saw this coming with the repetition of Islam is evil, Muslims are terrorists. That monstrous image of Islam, it's in the making since 9/11. So 9/11 will set us back in that American Islam project for a couple of years, but we will get there. We will get there, but I highly encourage you to, like JCC at Peninsula, JCC San Francisco should have 6-week series on Islam. We should have 6-week series on
We had
American.
here, we did.
Yeah.
But we'll do it again.
And apparently, some of the classes that you have attended was not very well taught. It could be done.
One caliph after another. What? That's not important. What does it? You got to talk
Was
about
it
the
taught by a
values.
Muslim or non-Muslim?
It was a Muslim guy who's married to a Jewish woman.
You're talking about the IMG class here?
No. It was many years ago. At
Ah.
the PJCC, right here.
Okay, well,
I totally agree with you that throwing useless medieval facts is not the help. Find some, I can be resourceful to you. Also find some of the few topics, theme, because one-off lectures are also useless. Invite a scholar in residence, a female Muslim scholar, to give 2-3 lectures about Islam and women and how Quran relates to gender. Invite an expert on terrorism violence, extremism, go thematically, not just superficial Islam 101.
That's great. You can have my job, and I'll go on a long vacation. That sounds like a great idea. Friends,
Go to Afghanistan.
yeah. We're going to bring our conversation to a close now. Before we do so, let me invite you, please, to stay around for a few moments. Have a cup of coffee. It's decaf. Have some